Many clients are involved with multiple agencies and can have many caseworkers, all of whom have their own requirements which must be met.
It's probably almost impossible for a family to have just one social worker. It's not unusual for a family to have up to 7 social workers for their case. And this is confusing because one social worker and another social worker's interviews may give advice that's in direct conflict with each other. So I think we really need to coordinate and communicate with each other to rectify this problem. Furthermore, people need to now go to this social worker for an interview, to this part of town, to this social worker for an interview, and their transportation has been taken from them. They need to go to work, they have kids to deal with, and everything closes at 5. There aren't very many agencies that are open till, say, 6 or 8 p.m., and this would really be ideal for many of the families, let alone the babysitting issue.
You have to be able to be sympathetic to circumstances, people's circumstances, because they all vary, they all different in one way or the other. You have to keep your mind open on that, first and foremost. Totally assess the situation, not just by what they feel that you should be getting, them personally meaning the workers themselves, not just by what they feel that you should be getting, but by your actual needs of the household.
I have this complaint that the agencies are far too rigid. People can go in and there's no flexibility in their individual case that they're presenting. There's also this snappiness involved in the interview, like where people's questions don't appear to be welcomed. And I think that this snappiness comes from the fact that the social workers are incredibly overwhelmed with the amount of cases that they're given.
It's bad enough you have to come in there and ask for help, and then you got to deal with rude girls at the desk. You know what I mean? They're rolling their eyes, acting like they don't even want to be there, but then maybe they should quit, you know? Because when you're working in a place where you're providing assistance and you have a customer service role, then you need to act accordingly. I don't want to hear, well, I'm having a bad day. Well, I'm having a bad year.
I've been a social worker for many years, and I want this to stop. I want the professionals that we're relying on to return phone calls, to return emails, to help a person out, to advocate where they can, give 125% every time to every family. Go home, rest up, come back into work, and do what we are supposed to do, what we're mandated to do.
We can no longer turn a blind eye to the consequences of poverty. Crime is the price we pay.
At a few minutes after 2, police responded to report of gunshots being fired in the Sands area. Upon police arrival, it was ascertained that a male was shot in the area of Main Road in Sands and Shore Road.
He was by a bullet and a gun. He got shot by those 2 things. Look.
The issue of crime is also linked to poverty. If you do not see yourself gaining the things that people have in society through normal means, one of the avenues you might decide to choose is crime.
I think what we're witnessing is a perfect storm of conditions that have bred a violent, drug-involved, angry, young underclass.
In their minds, what they're doing is right. It's not wrong, it's their lifestyle, it's their survival mechanism. You know what I mean? That's how they survive. Crime, it's gone up, but to them, it's just be killed or kill. It's not, oh, this is wrong, it's, okay, well, if I don't get them first, they're gonna get me. And that's where the violence starts.
These are young people who were born early to mid-90s. These were the first cohort to experience the huge gap between the cost of living and the actual wages at the lower end of the economic spectrum. So these children were raised with mothers who had multiple jobs to pay the rent, who were exhausted, depleted, anxious, and who probably didn't have the emotional wherewithal to really nurture and spend time with their children.
I've stayed in almost every area where I would say you consider gang areas. I've lived in Middletown, I've lived up 42nd, I grew up on Roberts Avenue, I've lived Cedar Avenue, I've lived Somerset, I've lived Rangers area, so I guess areas where crime is a huge factor. I feel like there are two scenarios with the situation as far as gang violence. It's the scenario of the boy who grew up in a household with a mom who he saw struggle, who was tired emotionally and drained and wanted to be the man of the household because he did not have a father, and growing up in the neighborhood where he sees guys that are selling drugs, or he's known about selling drugs all his life. Getting out of high school, or even while in high school, selling drugs is easy. It's money in his mom's pocket and it becomes a lifestyle.
My son was in my backyard and he was like, "Mama, I heard gunshots." And I was like, "What?" I was sleeping. I was like, "You don't heard nothing." He was like, "Mama, let me in, they're shooting." So he jumps through the window. I'm like, then my cousin comes running out. "You heard that?" I was like, "Heard what?" My auntie just said, somebody's shooting. Get down there, somebody shot in front of his children. And I'm like, that could have been my children on there because I was about to take my children on there. This is why I don't go anywhere. My children don't go to a lot of events. Good Friday, they didn't go anywhere.
Telling somebody that they have to work for $400 a week at 8 hours a day when they can make $400 in 2 hours, most people are gonna be like, no, I'm not doing that. That $400 a week you're paying me isn't going to take care of my mom or isn't going to take care of my child's mother.
We need to think that if a parent has to work 2 and 3 jobs, who's nurturing their children?
As things tend to break down, I think the attention, the nurturing that a child is supposed to receive is lacking. And so they look for it in other places.
If a person is unable to make a sufficient salary to sustain themselves, how can they afford to pay for their children to have extracurricular activities? It can be that they're being nurtured with themselves. So who's providing the teachings, the instructing, the nurturing, the hugs, the kisses that are needed to provide self-worth, self-value?
Sometimes they find it in other families. Maybe they find it in association by a church or something along those lines. But they do look for that nurturing elsewhere. And if a gang seems to be providing that, then they're going to drift towards that way. So I think it's all interrelated. We sort of say, the breakdown of the family unit and all those sorts of things. But when we start to look at how it actually plays out and the pieces of the puzzle as they fit together, then we can look at it from a holistic point of view. If we can house our people, if we can feed our children, if we can do all those sorts of things, that will help to prevent them looking for their identity outside of the home, and we'll probably see less crime as well.
Why is it that so many of our young men caught up in violence and crime are Black? And why are those struggling in Bermuda disproportionately represented by Black members of our community? What is the role of race and its historical legacy?
Locally, you could ask the question of race and poverty in Bermuda. There is the perception that there are only Blacks that are in poverty, and that is not always true. It is the perception that has been given to that. And so instead of the what, it is the question of the why. Those are deeper questions that need to be asked.
Well, I think you have to look back to when the first laws were on the books to give preference to whites over Blacks.
And so when you look at the legislation that was historically passed, and there was a great deal of it to ensure that Black people were disempowered, Black people were disenfranchised. When you look at that, you have to realize that that is in fact white affirmative action, and there's hundreds of years of white affirmative action that happened.
If you then look at those policies and ask, well, how does that impact today? We see Blacks being certainly paid less. We see more Blacks represented in the prison system. We see Blacks being found more at and below the poverty levels. How did that all happen? It's built up over all those centuries where blacks were excluded, and you're talking very recent history. 1959 theater boycott, when really the first real blow to what I would call white affirmative action was taken, but that's very, very recent. And so the progress, in fact, that blacks have made since the 1960s has been tremendous, but we've got over 400 years to catch up.
Today, you feel that black people might have the opportunity. There is concrete evidence in the statistical data that's available that shows that is not the case, that there is inequality, is economic disparity. For instance, in 1991, statistics clearly showed that if you had no education as a white male and you were working, you would be earning more than a black male who had a degree.
When we look at the prison population, and there are 97% black males, the question is, how did they get there? Is it because black males are committing most of the crimes? Well, with blacks representing 70% of the Bermudian population, if they were representative, you would probably see about 70% there. But why is it that 97% are there? Well, it all starts with how do you get introduced to the criminal justice system?
Bermuda's problems are serious, but they are not unique. Many countries, including the United Kingdom and the United States, are facing similar difficult decisions, socially, economically, and politically. Bermuda is somewhat of a microcosm, and one has to ask if a country with a population of only 65,000 people and a per capita GDP of over $85,000, if we can't solve the problem, then who can? Bermuda as a community must ask, what can be done? How can we better serve this population of struggling families?
Getting things right is extremely important. Sitting in this twilight of powerlessness is not worthy of Bermuda. Government and the corporate residents were able to effectively act with the meltdown of 2008 in the financial economy. Legislation, oversight, and effective policies were put into place. Yet, Bermuda has the same core issues that have been reigning for 52 years that remain unaddressed and unsolved, and they could be.
There are many organizations working to serve the vulnerable populations of our community. With over 400 charities, the third sector is highly active. But when they see their government grants cut by up to 50%, in addition to all the government programs that have seen their budgets cut, the ability to serve these vulnerable populations is severely crippled. Bermuda's NGOs can only do so much, and there's a vital role that government needs to be playing in ensuring an adequate social safety net.
Here at the Salvation Army Food Bank, we have seen a tremendous increase in demand from folks from all walks of life, single parents, single males, families. We definitely have an increase in people that would like to come more than once a month, but the way it is now, we can only service them once a month because we have to try to take care of everybody.
I was asked, if I had the power to do anything, and they were talking about the crime, what is it that I would do? And my response was to house your people.
We need policies that demonstrate a recognition by the government and the community as a whole that housing and adequate affordable housing is a basic human right.
The state has to step in and provide some reasonable housing, not those 6-7-story buildings where internationally it's been proven that they eventually end up becoming your ghettos and your trouble areas, maybe no higher than about 3 stories spread around the island.
If you house your people, and this could be done through government subsidies, it could be through, like the government does have now, income geared to rent program. Those are sorts of things that are needed in terms of alleviating the burden of housing, because if we don't have that, that causes people to do other things in terms of getting a roof over their head. But if you provide the housing and then you lower the payroll tax, that means they're getting more in their pocket, and then you do some of the educational things, you start to chip away at what is now a major problem.
Recent attempts by government to reduce the number of unskilled or semi-skilled foreign workers is laudable. The numbers of people who have attended the job fairs is certainly an indication that Bermudians are prepared to do that kind of work, that they want those jobs. The problem will be, unless the wages for these sectors in some way reflects the actual cost of living, Bermudians will not be able to afford to take the jobs if they have a family, and they need to be able to house and feed their families. So attention is going to have to be paid going forward to addressing what is a sustainable living wage. It must be something that reflects the actual cost of living.
Having a minimum wage could be an idea, but enforcing the established wages now through unions and through follow-ups could help eliminate that problem of the Bermudian getting a decent wage.
I think the concept of perhaps drawing a line in the sand and saying anybody who earns less than $36,000 a year does not have to pay their portion of the payroll tax. That immediately puts money into the pockets of those who are at that poverty level in Bermuda.
If legislation got us here, then obviously legislation is going to get us out of here.
There's no doubt that many of the programs that we will need to institute in order to change the trajectory that we are on will be expensive, there's no doubt. The question really has to be asked, what will happen if we don't? If we don't deal with this at the front end, if we don't put our money into prevention, if we don't make sure our families are housed, what will that mean at the back end? Well, it will mean that we spend thousands of times more money incarcerating these very people that we didn't protect when they were young children. It will be much more expensive at the back end, not to mention the human costs.
I refuse to let anybody hold me back. I've came this far and I'm not going to stop.
Let's wake up and open our eyes. We need to do more to get our country back the way how it was.
It comes down to every individual helping to make a difference in the lives of those around us. It comes to the business community playing their part, donating the much-needed funding. It comes to the government putting the necessary policies and resources in place to enable Bermudians to meet their basic needs. And when the government does not do this, it requires the entire community, from the individual to the businesses and NGOs, to pressure the government to make these changes. It is the people that have the power to create the political will, and without that will, nothing will be done.
I'm glad that I have. I'm glad that God let your heart beat in aliens. Because without you, I wouldn't even be halfway.